Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Baptista. I'm a product marketing director here at New Relic. I am responsible today to bring to you the full stack observability review, why it matters to IT leaders. We're going to be talking about some key insights from the 2022 observability forecast report. There's going to be links to the report. There's going to be contribution from our several experts here. In the meantime, like I said, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Alan Baptista. Been here at New Relic for a little over a year now. Am working on verticals and different projects, including this one. I have the pleasure of being here with Alicia, Peter, and Darren. They'll each introduce themselves. Lane, our VP of Competitive Intelligence, unfortunately could not be present, so sadly, he won't be able to join us. So Alicia, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia Bastieri, and I'm in charge of long-form content at New Relic. So that's stuff like reports and white papers, and I'm also the report author. So I look forward to discussing the report with you today.
Thank you. Darren, you're muted.
Oh, and of course I would be. Hi, I'm Darren Brabham. I'm a senior analyst with ETR, Enterprise Technology Research. We're a firm that New Relic worked with to conduct the study and provide some of the analysis and field it in the field. So happy to be here with you, based in Austin, Texas.
Nice. How's the weather out there?
Still pretty warm. And an Astros fan in the World Series. So.
Oh, let's not go there.
Good. I know.
All right, and last but definitely not least, it was already tomorrow. Talk about the future now. Peter knows what Friday is looking like. Peter, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Morales. I'm the Chief Architect for New Relic, supporting customers across Asia Pacific and Japan. And I'm the anomaly here. I'm based out of Melbourne, Australia. So glad to be with you all.
There you go. There you go. And for those that are listening in live, please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A tab across your menu bar. We will be taking those either throughout the event or at the end. There will be some time allotted for Q&A. So feel free to add those questions and we will address them as we can. So what we are going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about the report, how we gathered it, what information we collected, who we interviewed, and so on. Darren is going to give a lowdown on all that great scientific, statistical information that is way over my head. So thank you, Darren, for being here on that. We're going to be talking about the findings that we had in that report. What is the state of observability around the world, actually? So quite exciting about that. We're going to talk briefly about what we envision the future of observability representing from the stats and from the trends that we've been able to identify. That's some great questions that you can add there as well. We look forward to seeing that. And then at the end, like I mentioned, we will have some time for Q&A. It'll be just a round robin. So if you have a particular question for someone, just put their name in there, or I'll just pick the next victim speaker, and they will answer the question, right? And then what's next? Some links and some conversations about what's forthcoming in terms of the reports that we're looking forward to. So why don't we go in without further ado? Darren, talk to us about the 2022 observability forecast report. What is it all about? What's the methodology? How did we collect this data?
Yeah, sure. So we went through and conducted this survey. This is, doing this again for another year in a row, and working with New Relic for the first time in our sort of partnership there. But sent a survey that had 25 questions in it around to IT decision makers and practitioners, so people working in the IT field. We had the survey in the field in March and April of 2022. So it was out there for I think it was about 6 weeks, spanning those 2 months. We compensated folks for participating in the survey, and we qualified them in based on their level of I guess, awareness or control or influence over their observability practice. We did a non-probability sampling. That's a pretty common, most industry surveys use that. We used a quota sampling so we could fill up certain buckets with different types of people so we could compare and contrast them. And some of the buckets we were trying to fill were based on geographic representations. We wanted to make sure we had a broad global footprint for participants in the field. And we were also looking for certain types of roles that they had in their organizations. So we're trying to get a mix of practitioners and those in more senior ranks that make decisions. So people who are on the ground working with the tools and people who make decisions about purchasing the tools and more strategic level decisions. So rolled that survey out, got the results in, and had been crunching that data for quite a while. And Alicia and I put together a pretty good analysis there and presented some findings in Las Vegas at FutureStack. And then the report was released shortly after. So that's been sort of the timeline of this. And we can go into the next slide.
One thing I think I want
Sure,
to mention here before we go there is that actually the raw data is available as an open sourced information, right? Alicia, could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're actually the only vendor that we decided to make the raw data available. So if anyone else wanted to get in there and play with it, they can. So that's something new. You can find a link to that on the About This Report section of the report.
Yeah, and I'll say too, that's highly unusual, and I applaud that. I wish more organizations would make their raw data available in the spirit of transparency and finding new insights. So kudos to New Relic for doing that. Yeah, and so then here's the demographic size. So this was a large uptick in the sample size from last year. So we had 1,614 folks respond. And it's more than any other observability report that I'm aware of in the field. This is definitely one of the more, if not the most robust sample size and span and depth of a survey on this topic that I'm aware of for sure. So it was kind of exciting to see some of this data roll in. And I'll add too that there are some really basic statistics that we uncovered here. Things like, what is your mean time to response to an incident? Just real basic stats that are really hard to find. It's hard to find that data out there in scholarly literature and anywhere else. So that was kind of just exciting to get some baselines that hadn't really been widely known. So that was exciting.
Yeah, I was most impressed by the coverage that we have. It's a fairly well distributed set of respondents. So that was exciting for me to have this global view of observability. Really.
Yeah, for sure. We had 3 different regions of the world represented as well, and there was a cluster of countries in Europe and a cluster of countries in North America, and then several countries in Asia. And then in terms of the respondents, the practitioners, we had 65% or so came from what are practitioner audience. So these are engineers, people kind of working with the tools on the ground. And then 35% from IT decision makers. Now we broke out a lot of the analysis in these 2 buckets, this kind of 2/3, 1/3 bucket between practitioners and IT decision makers. IT decision makers include things like non-executive managers, like directors and so on, as well as the C-suite and top VPs. The age range, you could see the kind of normal distribution curve there. We had everyone from 19 to 72 taking the survey and clustering in around the 40-year mark in age. And then in terms of gender representation, it was 80 to 20, male to female. It'd be more exciting to see a bit more balance there, but this actually is reflective of what's in the industry. So more an accurate reflection of an industry that needs some better sex and gender balance, but that was sort of the findings there. And then the firmographics, so the types of organizations we got, more than half were from mid-size organizations. And the way we defined this was in between 100 and 1,200 employees. So it's a fairly wide band, but that's kind of what we define as mid-size. And then larger than that was 35% were from large organizations, so 1,200 and up, and then 8% from small organizations with 100 or fewer employees. And then in terms of annual revenue, a lot of organizations were falling in the 100 million plus revenue range, several more in the band below that, and then 17% in sort of the $1 to $10 million range in revenue. So that's the distribution on that. And then in terms of industry, we had large representation from the IT, telco. This is basically technology companies and telecom, and then financial institutions, followed by industrials and retail and consumer, and on down the list. Not as much representation from nonprofits and education and government and so on, but tends to be kind of a normal breakdown in terms of how we do a lot of our studies at ETR anyway.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a lot already.
It's a lot of data already.
There's one thing I wanted to add too.
Sure.
In the report itself, we noticed a lot of different responses between different role types and regions. So we have different call outs by role, by region, by industry, and by org size throughout the report. And then we also, if you download the PDF of the report, it's about 80 pages, but a lot of that's in the appendix. So we included, we like deep dove. We have like a whole section that breaks the data down by region and also by country. And then we also do that for industries and some other things as well. So it's definitely worth downloading that PDF if you want to see some of that information.
Yeah, definitely a lot of data broken out. So if you're interested just in Asia Pacific region and how it affects some of the questions we answered, that's in the report. So it's all there.
All right, we're starting to get some questions. So
I know, I see that.
We will get to those responses shortly. So hang in there, those that posted the questions, bear with us here. So wow, that's a lot of information. Wonderful background. Thank you, Darren, for that.
Sure.
And information on how we collected and expecting some great information to come out of this. And so for the observability lay people out here, I think that one of the first things that we asked in the report was, what's driving really the need for observability? We asked the question, actually, which technology strategies and trends are driving the need for observability at your particular company? We asked the respondents to actually select all that applied. So they had the ability to select multiple options. And here's some interesting things that we found, right? That we know that modern applications typically run in the cloud, the more, recent kind of developed solutions, and they depend on hundreds of subservices and components, each introducing additional monitoring challenges and needs and security risks for that matter. So with cloud adoption, these cloud native applications and architectures and cybersecurity threats, which are commonplace almost, those threats are on the rise. So it's not surprising, really, that we see this increased focus on security, governance, risk, and compliance being the most frequently cited strategy or trend driving the need for observability. And in all the organizations that we surveyed, right, almost half of them said that was that was the factor. Development of cloud native front-end application and architectures tied with increased focus on customer experience management and the migration to multi-cloud back-end environment. So at 40%. So that kind of indicates the more modern solutions are the more desired, maybe, and we'll get to a point later on in the discussion about that. But while not on the top responses, but fairly close enough, we see that 39% of the respondents said that they are adopting open source technologies, such as open telemetry, and then 36 are adopting serverless computing, and another 36 responded that they're using containerized application and workloads. All these trends were where observability requires this or should require this unified approach. What is it that you see there out in the field, Peter, around the driving trends and talking to, the customers, analysts in your journeys around, architecting observability out there in the Asia Pac? What is it that we're seeing as trends driving observability?
Yeah, I think the top three are the things that we're seeing most often, particularly in our customer base. In our customer base, we have a lot of digital native companies that are going on the digital transformation. So they're all sort of adopting cloud native architectures and refactoring their applications. And so if you think about observability, it's a modern way of observing those environments because they're very complex environments to sort of untangle and identify problems in those particular environments. But then the other area we're seeing is that, cloud native now is kind of become normalized. Pretty much everyone's doing it. So then the question becomes, how do you gain a competitive advantage? And so we see that the attention is now moving towards like the risk, governance, and security, particularly in those regulated environments. And then secondly, around, how do we move forward on customer experience? Like, what can we do to gain the slightest competitive advantage? So when you think about a full stack, what change can we make? What can we tweak, or what can we experiment with to determine, how we move forward and how we get that competitive advantage. I guess the other point here is, I think the observability industry is a little bit stuck at the moment in terms of an identity problem. A lot of people think about observability as just managing reliability and solving problems. And look, those are two very important things. And, most of our customers will use observability for that. But observability has evolved a long time ago and can support a much broader set of use cases. Security is a new one for New Relic. We just released vulnerability management. But there's many other use cases that you can solve with observability. And I think these trends really demonstrate that.
So one of the questions saying that, enterprises around the world have this hybrid environment, and I guess this trend actually demonstrates or they're talking about multi-cloud environments, but they're still struggling to have this unified look or unified full stack monitoring capability, or maybe overwhelmed by attempting it or trying it, really. So how should these organizations explore observability needs other than, being a buzzword around, and we'll get to the distinction of, what is observability in a little bit, but how should organizations, take on this observability journey the way I talk about it? Do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I think if you look at most modern observability platforms these days, they're all built on SaaS solutions. And the whole idea of a SaaS-based solution is so that you can pull in data from anywhere and normalize that data and standardize it. So it doesn't matter if you're monitoring an AWS resource or an Azure resource or a Google resource. At the end of the day, all that gets normalized and standardized so that when you're observing an end-to-end multi-cloud environment, everything looks the same. And it makes a whole lot more sense when it comes to understanding what's happening in your environment. So what I would say is, when you're sort of evaluating the options out there, look at some of the modern SaaS-based observability platforms rather than thinking about, the traditional point-based solutions that exist in the market.
Okay. Darren, did anything stood out for you in terms of the responses that you saw and read and looked through that kind of guide some of that? Is observability truly just a buzzword, or is it more than that?
That's come up a fair amount. We at ETR, we also conduct kind of a series of interviews, one-on-one interviews with IT decision makers as sort of a separate practice. And I will say that question of, is this a buzzword? What does this really mean? How is it different from monitoring? Some folks get it, some don't, and some have clear ideas about what it is, and some don't. But what we are hearing kind of consistently in some of these interviews is the multifaceted nature, right? The need to see everything and have kind of the ability to unify different things that are going on in the organization is becoming more and more necessary to answer risk primarily. It's often kind of coupled with questions about cyber insurance and all sorts of other kind of risk and compliance questions that people are dealing with. So I think, it's almost like the word aside, I think people are still getting on board with this idea of needing to have broader observation abilities, let's say, over what's going on end to end. So definitely a trend we've been seeing in some of our discussions with IT decision makers here at ETR.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll dive in a little deeper on what that really means in New Relic world and beyond. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. So then we asked, all right, so how is observability being used? What are the use cases, right? So which of the following use cases, purposes are you applying observability was the question. And we gave them an option to select all of the options. So as we investigated these technical use cases, where observability was most important to the respondents, here's some of the results that we found. That a wide range of use cases, the most common ones being that, like we mentioned, optimizing cloud resources had 31%, supporting digital transformation efforts. So that one's kind of a new one from the previous trend that we saw, that helps improve and gain a competitive advantage from that digital customer experience we talked about. also tied at first with 31%. And then we see managed, containerized, and serverless environments. We talked about that also as the new frontier of technology, or new environments that are being monitored and or observed. Increasing the speed to market for new products and services. That kind of ties with the digital transformation aspect, I think, very, very closely. And then supporting an organizational IT move into DevOps. I would even say DevSecOps is kind of the even further frontier that many organizations are looking into that. So interestingly, that all these seem to be that the cloud monitoring and containerized and serverless environments are among the most common use cases of observability. Why do you think that is, Peter? Is it the proliferation of this newer source of data versus going beyond the traditional on-prem or the traditional data center? Is there a transition happening here?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the comment around cloud native, right? That inherently is correlated with shifting your workloads to the public cloud. And so when customers go down that route, what they're really doing as well is they're reevaluating their observability strategy and their monitoring strategy, and trying to figure out how to get the best given that shift to a completely new platform. And so, yeah, what we're seeing, particularly now with the economic conditions around uncertainty, right? Customers are looking at how can they leverage their observability platform to help optimize their cloud resource usage. I think public cloud has had a really good run of growth over the last couple of years, but now organizations are starting to realize that they need to tighten their belts a little bit, and so they're going to use the observability tools that they have available to them to support them in that endeavor. And then the second one around digital transformation, for me, how do you leverage observability to support your digital transformation? Really what it's about is having those real-time feedback loops, right? I mean, if you think about old ways of deploying and developing software around waterfall, it took months or quarters to get a feedback loop on what was the outcome of changes to your software. When you think about agile software development methods and coupling that with an observability solution, the whole idea is that you can release frequently and you can get feedback in near real time, so you can see what is the cause and effect of the things that you're actually working on. So that's why I think we see, supporting digital transformation right up the top there, and that's certainly what we see with our customers.
Awesome. So we asked all of the people or organizations about, their drivers and their use cases. So then we wanted to dive a little more deeply into observability capabilities. What does observability really mean, and what are the capabilities that they're looking for? So we wanted to know. We gave them a list of 17, I believe, popular observability capabilities to the survey respondents that they were, and asked them, what is the company's current deployment or plans for deploying the following observability capabilities, and listed those 17s, and gave them the option for them to select any or all that applied. And here's what we found. The survey the respondents indicated that the organization deployed observability capabilities as much as 57% for network monitoring, and as little as 34% for Kubernetes monitoring. And I think this indicates kind of an interesting distribution, I guess, in the way that the higher end, or the ones that have been currently deployed, are coincidentally the ones that have a longer history in the marketplace. And the newer, more in vogue topics, or the more recent technologies are gravitating towards the end. Why do you think that is, Peter?
I think it's just because of the reason you just said, right? This chart can be a little bit deceiving, right? If you're reviewing your observability strategy and you look at this chart, you'll probably say, oh, look, I need network monitoring, security monitoring, and database monitoring, right? But the reality is they're they're the most widely deployed because they're some of the oldest technologies, right? I've been doing observability and monitoring and problem solving for 25 years. And, I can remember back in those days, using network monitoring tools to look at packets across switches. And so those technologies have been around for decades. Really what you want to know is, of these technologies, which ones allow you to achieve your desired outcome, right? Rather than just looking at this blindly. And so that's a topic we'll dive into a little bit later and help you understand, of these capabilities, which ones can help you do things like reduce your mean time to respond and detect issues within your environment. I think that's a much more important takeaway.
Okay, Darren, any thoughts there in what IT leaders are looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to echo that. Obviously, it's some of the newer emerging technologies. People haven't really thought about how to monitor that stuff yet. I think, to call out AI ops and ML model performance monitoring, especially, these are, data science teams. If an organization has a robust data science team that has good, ML ops happening, which, several don't, right? They're still emerging, or it's not good hygiene yet. All that needs to kind of be in place first to get the stuff working before they start thinking about how to monitor it. So it's a matter of time. I think it's coming, and within a year or two, we'll probably see a lot more of this uptick.
Yeah, it's interesting how you're almost seeing an expansion too of who should be worried or who should be involved in observability, because you're adding security monitoring or compliance monitoring in different organizations as well. The network aspects of it, infrastructure. Now you're having developers maybe in Kubernetes, and so you're expanding the, who's worried about observability. You're adding another layer of population around that. Any thoughts there on what, how is observability, reaching out to these different audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think as it starts to involve more folks from around the organization from different departments, it sort of puts strain, I guess is the right word. It puts some strain on organizational dynamics, right? So if you're an organization that has a sort of federated approach to how you handle data, let's say, where you have kind of a central governed, but you also let departments do their own business-led thing in sort of a give and take way, you probably will have an easier time managing something like this. But if you're a completely fragmented and decentralized organization with a lot of shadow IT and lots of different policies, this might be more of a challenge. And so you get a lot of different people that are starting to think about whether, if and how they should be involved in monitoring observability, and trying to get all those folks together at the table would be challenging. So some of this reflects the maturity or the style of an organization as well, layered on top of the fact that some of this stuff is just still emerging. So it's a complex terrain for sure.
Interesting. We talked a little bit, and there's a question here that I'm going to bring up. Peter, you mentioned about cloud instances and observability for that. This person is asking, with cloud native, surely it being the trend, we're talking each about cloud native applications sitting in one particular public cloud. But when you start adding an aspect of hybrid cloud or a mix of hybrid on-prem and the variations thereof, right, you start to add a level of complexity that becomes a level of, exponentially harder for you to manage, right? So in cloud native, if hybrid, then the metrics are from cloud used and on-prem. How does observability help track this complexity in different sources of metrics and their respective correlations? How do you see that, coming into a single view or a single understanding of your complex environments?
Yeah, and that's really the whole premise around observability, is to unify all that data, to standardize all that data, to understand the relationships between all those objects and components, and then to create visualizations around that data that help you to understand and interpret that environment very easily, right? So again, it doesn't matter if it's coming, if the metrics are coming from AWS or Google or Microsoft or even on-prem solutions. So long as you're using a standard approach to observability, a single platform that allows you to normalize all that data and gather all that data in one place, then a lot of that complexity that you would typically see with point solutions and then leveraging the individual cloud providers' monitoring capabilities, those issues ultimately will disappear, right? And it's really just a force function of that unification of all the data
normalization, yeah. Mhm.
and the normalization and standardization of the data.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we asked all about this, and then we want to take it, we asked a little bit more. We want to take a deeper look on how these capabilities were actually being implemented, right? In terms of the number of tools. So we asked, how many tools does your particular company currently use in total for the observability capabilities that were mentioned earlier? So panelists, is this a reflection of an assumption of tool fragmentation is alive and well, or what does the fact that we have 20% of respondents having 7 or more tools, that's significant. Why do you think that is, Darren?
The way things evolve and grow, they sort of grow in different directions, or it might be one of those situations where one department picked up one tool to monitor one thing, and then 2 years later, another department picked up another tool to monitor something different. It organically grows like that. This is, I think, kind of a natural evolution for many organizations. So part of that is just that there's some tools that have been around for a long time and some that have been splashed in every couple of years to track different things. And some may be doing it because they just think that maybe multiple tools helps answer their question better, right? Maybe they want multiple indicators and they don't entirely know what's out there to unify it or do it in a more elegant way. But a lot of organizations do get to a point where they want to step back, especially when they need to tighten belts on their budget and try to figure out ways to rationalize their tools and come up to figure out what can be replaced or combined. And as new vendors release new capabilities, they think about maybe they could latch onto that for that capability. So it's an evolving thing, but not too surprised to see that there were multiple tools. A little surprised though to see that 7 tools was so common.
And then we see 82% actually being between 4 or more monitoring tools. So
yeah,
is tool fragmentation alive and well, Peter?
It's absolutely real. I just finished a review, one of our customers' environments, where I was reviewing their observability strategy, and I counted no less than 6 tools, right? And what's worse, and this chart doesn't really articulate it, is that there was a lot of overlap between those tools, right? So not only are we making it harder on the practitioners to use 6 tools, we're actually paying extra, right, for all those tools because of all that overlap. And so I think, as a practitioner myself, right, I often don't think about the cost of things. I only really think about the capabilities and whether they meet my needs. But I think, given the economic uncertainty that we're now entering, I think the tide's turning a little bit and management's starting to ask, whether we need all these tools and, how can we rationalize them? So I think tool consolidation is going to become a lot more important for organizations in the next couple of years.
I was going to ask you, what do you think is the strategy going on? Is there a consolidation of, platforms for observability, or we may have special cases for, each of the various tools for particular purposes?
Yeah, look, I think from what I'm seeing, the pendulum swung towards consolidation. I think anything in IT, really, the secret sauce to maximizing your budget is to consolidate your technology and your technology vendors. So definitely I see that the problem is rather prolific in monitoring and observability just because we have such a long history, right? And the technology and the landscapes that we support has had a seismic shift, right? If you think about going from monolithic software to now cloud native, first it was one single public cloud, now it's multi-cloud, now it's hybrid cloud, right? Now we have platform engineering teams and Kubernetes. It's just the constant change. And so the monitoring tools have to keep up. And that's why you end up with 6, 7 tools, right? But that's just not sustainable in the long term. And so I think customers that have been putting off tool consolidation are going to be revisiting that. And for us, the proof point is our logging product, right? So we released our logging capability a few years ago, and that's just seen tremendous adoption because it is a very cost-effective alternative for customers that have kind of traditional logging-based solutions out there.
Darren, you came off mute. Is there a thought that you want to make, or
I was just going to reflect that, it's what Peter's describing is sort of this exponential complexity. It's like you've got the country, you may operate in multiple countries, some that have tricky regulations or tricky patterns. You might have multiple clouds, multiple, systems, things that are updating. It's a constant thing to keep chasing, and you keep layering on. You end up with thousands of different use cases that you're trying to track in different metrics. So yeah, I think people are craving some simplicity, and I think the economic climate kind of forces a lot of people to step back and try to find those elegant solutions. So I think that's maybe the turn we're making.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Alicia, we asked this company observability strategy, the use and single consolidation. Was this the one that you actually sliced and diced different data, or was it or I'm confusing another slide? I can't recall.
Yeah, not this one. This one,
Okay.
we were wanting to know, what is the preference out there? Like, we saw how many tools they're using, like what do they want to be using? So this is showing that, almost 50% would prefer a single consolidated platform. But as we saw from the previous slide, that's not what they're doing.
Yeah, everybody wants to have simplicity. They're craving it. So yeah.
I mean, the one thing I'd like to dig in here is the 33% that prefer multiple point solutions, right? Like, I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking, well, what could possibly be the rationale for that? The one rationale I can think of is vendor lock-in, right? I can think of a scenario where, particularly the technologists, they want that freedom to unlock themselves in particular vendors' solutions. So I'm curious to know from the audience, double click on that question and give us some ideas of why would you want to pursue a multi-monitoring sort of tool strategy. And the other thing I'll say around that, I think if we talk about vendor locking and the observability space in general, like we have now the OpenTelemetry standard, and the whole idea of that standard is to help customers avoid that vendor locking and give them the option to move to different solutions if they choose in the future. Now that standard is still, maturing, and the implementations are still maturing, but I think over time, as it evolves, maybe that 33% starts to, come down. That's my hope.
That's a great point. The OpenTelemetry, I guess, is the first step in democratizing the information across various tools and platforms. Is a great point. Thank you. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit now, and let's see what the survey, what we asked about the benefits actually about survey. Is there anything that we can explore there? And here's what we found, right? We asked, what is the primary benefit enabled by your organizational deployment of observability? And we asked them to select the top 5 options. And here's how they broke down. We found that respondents saw clear benefits as a result of their current observability deployments, where we saw uptime, performance, and reliability being the top, and I guess most, not surprising, the most kind of expected in a way, because that is the nature of the tool. Operational efficiency following there, because customer experience, some level of innovation. That was an interesting, direction on how you're able to have observability contributing to innovation, and business and revenue growth as an indirection, right? And these results, I think, indicate how observability really can transform an organizational business, technology, and even revenue for that matter, right? So what are your thoughts there about these findings? Does it truly reflect the benefits you're seeing out there Peter, in the market?
Yeah, look, I think that I would say the top three are the most obvious use cases for observability. It's really all about reliability, uptime, and performance of your applications. And then secondly, it's around operational efficiency and how you can impact your customers. And in particular, that how you can impact your customers really requires full stack observability, right? You won't get that if you're only doing partial observability. I think the one where we have an opportunity to maybe leap forward much faster is to focus more on the business, right? And how does observability support the business, and how does observability support revenue growth? Because if you think about observability right now, it's all about bits and bytes. It's about metrics, it's about latency, throughput, errors, etc. But in reality, what I see is a lot of the more mature customers, what they do is they infuse their telemetry streams with business context, right? So for example, dollars, user preferences, separating users' actions into different cohorts. And the reason they do that is because they can start to see what is the actual business impact associated with their actions. So it's not just now about, performance has dropped or throughput has dropped or error rates have increased. This is actually having an impact in my product's bottom line. And I think that's really the opportunity we have to expand on the benefits of observability. But the challenge is it just doesn't come for free, right? There's some work that you need to do to add that business context into the observability platforms that you choose to consume. But I think the benefits far outweigh the effort required to do that, because ultimately what you're getting is real-time business feedback, right? And today, I don't know any business intelligence system that will actually give you real-time business feedback and allow you to understand the cause and effect of your actions from a business perspective.
There you go. You heard it here first. What I like to call business observability in the various conversations, and how the underlying technology can influence that ability to directly tie it in to code, to operations, to delivery, to the ability to include revenue. Are you seeing this trend also out there with ITDM, Darren, in terms of a maturation or a growth of observability? Kind of, is there a maturity model for observability out there? How are you seeing this progression of, we started with APM, we added more, we're still adding more in terms, and how is this transformational adding to a business observability?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see a lot of parallels with a lot of things. You see it in data and analytics. You see it in a lot of different practices. Is there's usually this maturity curve where people are putting technologies in place to sort of prevent the bad things from happening, right? Like, we need to monitor our network because it would be bad if we didn't, right? That kind of thing. And then they sort of shift to, we need to start monitoring more things, and we need to make this more of a robust practice and a daily thing. Let's get reports and dashboards and all that kind of stuff. And then there's a turn that's this, being proactive with it. How can we move now to thinking of all this data at our fingertips and all this information and use it in a proactive way to get ahead of the curve, or to innovate, or to find new markets, or whatever it might be, right? These sorts of forward-looking challenges. I think a lot of things with technology and at an enterprise technology scale usually work in that sort of pattern, right? We're going to plug the holes now. We're going to figure out a plan for keeping those holes plugged and finding new holes. And then let's think about, now that the holes are plugged, let's figure out how we can use this to our advantage to get ahead. And yeah, we sort of have captured some of that trend. It'd be nice to actually develop a model, right? The scholar.
We have one, Darren.
Yeah. Like, and test it and really kind of, I'm thinking in kind of the nerdy scholarly way. But yeah, so that's sort of what I'm seeing anecdotally in some of these conversations.
So I see a doctorate degree somewhere coming up, right? Some
Not doing it
research
again.
in your academia friend. So
Yeah.
How do you see this summarized, Darren? I think we work together on this kind of consolidation of these metrics and this summary. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so this, a lot of nuanced statistics on this, but essentially what we asked were, what's your current state of, outages and your mean time to response and detection. And then we were able to parse that on the back end. I think that slide's probably coming up, between those with what we call full stack observability, which we'll talk about in a sec. What we're finding consistently is those that have full stack observability, those that have the mature, robust practices that are touching different parts of the organization, they, across the board had better metrics on the ability to detect outages, to respond to them, and put them down. So that was a consistent finding that we found. We found it at all different levels, to varying degrees, but that was always the divider, was those who are doing observability are able to respond and detect faster. And that's kind of a no-brainer, but it's nice to see the data behind it, because I don't think anyone's had it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So you mentioned full stack observability, and we wanted to kind of define this kind of straightforward. We outlined, I think it was, like I said, 17 capabilities, and we found that the observability in this report that is a full stack is really achieved by organizations that deploy these specific combination of observability capabilities, which include customer experience monitoring, or DM, front end services monitoring, log management, and environment monitoring for the back end. So these are some key aspects in terms of what the maturity step is. This is not the complete vision of full stack observability is an advancement, but it's not comprehensive to the level of business observability that we talked about earlier. So
Sure.
I think the basic definition is not to have any obvious blind spots, right? If you're supporting your customers, you're supporting your business processes, and you're using digital technologies to do that now, it's important to have visibility across all the components that are supporting those transactions and those processes, so that when things do arise, or if you need to improve or optimize, you have that visibility.
And we also talk about an evolution, right? In terms of a revolution. I think, I'm not sure if we have this outline, but we did in preparation. We talked a lot about how observability is really an evolution. It's step by step. You're incrementally changing. You're adding new data points, new metrics that you're tracking, new frontiers that you're exploring to add to that visibility pane of glass. So how do you see that observability evolution versus revolution, Peter?
Yeah, I'll talk about the evolution, and then we'll touch on revolution later. But if you look at the last 20 years of capabilities around monitoring and then observability, everything started with networking monitoring, and then infrastructure monitoring, server monitoring, that type of thing. And then, when the web became popular, we started looking at browser-based monitoring, right? Monitoring the web experience for customers. And then the mobile was introduced, and therefore real user monitoring was introduced, where, part of the application logic moved into the user's mobile device. And we now had to start get visibility of that, right? Otherwise, that's a significant blind spot. And then part of that, and one of the things I did miss there, was actually APM, right? So APM allows us to monitor the backend services that are supporting our business logic. So that's really the sort of fundamental evolution. And now there's platforms like Kubernetes that we have to monitor as a whole, and also the public cloud, right? Being able to pull those logs and those metrics from public cloud providers' environments to give visibility of that, that underlying substrate that's supporting all our software. That's fundamentally the evolution we see. And different customers are going to be in different stages of that evolution, and largely it's because they haven't been able to just kind of justify the need for having all this visibility. But I think really what this report highlights is really in today's modern society where everyone's now dependent on a mobile device, right, to interface with your business, you can't really live without this sort of full stack observability capability because there's just far too many blind spots.
Mhm. Alicia, you came off mute. Do you have a comment?
I was just going to add that I think for next year, we were going to add security monitoring to this definition as well. So.
Yes, that's a new frontier for observability for sure. And I think the next slide is where there was some slicing and dicing, right?
Yeah, so one of the main reasons why we defined full stack observability in the report, and we didn't do it in the survey to avoid bias, is because we wanted to take a look at like which of the respondents had already achieved it. So what we did, we defined, they had to have this, or this, and then we queried for all of the respondents that had that. And what we found was that only about 27% had already achieved full stack observability.
So a third, almost a third, well, shy of a third.
That's a third.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Any thoughts here? So Darren, you came off mute.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting to see, when you ask who have you done it, have you achieved full stack? Very few said they had, right? But according to our definition, there's a few more that had, and I think what was a standout. We did ask questions about budget, what your current budget allocation is for observability in your IT budget, and those that have full stack observability they're allocating more money, right? They've got 5% or more of their IT budgets allocated for observability tools, which is notable relative to the rest of the responses. So it shows that you have to invest in this stuff if you want to have it, but kind of worth it in the end. And I think those budgets will probably go up over time. Something we've thought about asking in a parsed out way at ETR of our technology spending surveys. It's kind of
interesting that to Peter's point, as it evolves, as the definition of full stack observability evolves, like we're adding security and so on, the fact that people have assume that they have a field of that definition, as it progresses, the organizations will still have to continually pursue the full stack observability and capability that evolution will drive towards. I think it's an interesting aspect there. And I know, Peter, that you're keen on predictability, right? Or the ability to be less reactive and more proactive. And I'll let you kind of elaborate here.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was really keen on understanding is, we asked the respondents what their mean time to resolution, mean time to detection was, but we also asked them what capabilities they had currently deployed. And so I was really keen to understand which of those capabilities actually drive a lower mean time to detection and resolution of issues. So we built a predictive model around this. And these are the results, right? What you see here is things like AI ops, distributed tracing, security monitoring, custom dashboards, and synthetic monitors are the things that really support a customer's ability to lower their response time and resolution of issues. And if I think about it logically, it does make a whole lot of sense that these are the capabilities that are really going to matter in your environment, because cloud native architectures, multi-cloud architectures, they're extremely complicated, right? You've taken one monolithic thing and split it up into 1,000. And so now you have to observe all those things and have to understand how they work. And I think it's virtually impossible for one human to be able to take all that information in and be able to solve any type of problem. So that's where AI ops comes into play, because it helps you sort of filter that information down to a probable root cause, right? Narrow down the things that you're looking at to try and identify the problem. And then I think the reason distributed tracing is up there is because we now live in a distributed world, right? Most software architectures now, particularly in our customer base, are highly distributed. And so the only way to wrap your hands around that is you actually need distributed tracing, because what that's going to do is help you track the causal path that a transaction takes through that distributed system. And that's going to really light up and give you the necessary information to then understand where things are actually failing, or where things are degraded, or where things can be improved to get a better outcome for your customers and the business.
Very good. So what's keeping organizations from, implementing this full stack observability was one question. What are the primary challenges? And this is what we found. Overall, a lack of understanding of the benefits and feeling that the current IT performance is adequate enough were the most frequent ones cited, kind of a tie for first place at 28% each. More than a quarter of respondents noted that they do not have the budgets. We actually asked, that comment earlier to your, Darren, about the budgets in terms of where they're investing aspects of it. So what are some of the key findings in terms of the challenges that you hear out there, Peter, from our customers? And then Darren, if you want to weigh in as well from the IT decision makers.
Yeah, I mean, I essentially see two types of customers. I see reactive customers, and they look at observability as a form of insurance, right? They wait for the car to crash, then they repair the crash using their insurance policy. There's a little bit of a problem with that approach, right? Is that a crash creates irreversible damage to a company's reputation. And so really, you really want to avoid that as much as possible. And so that leads me to the second category, which is a proactive customers that look at observability from a proactive perspective, where they're literally using observability every day to support their digital systems, right? And what they're trying to do is constantly evaluate where the problems may arise, right? So that they can actually prevent the crash from happening in the first place. And, observability is not the only thing you need to kind of achieve that. You need an architecture that helps you, minimize the extent of failures in your environment, but you also need a release process that helps you sort of release new software and new features to your customers iteratively in small increments, right? So that you can measure the feedback of those particular releases. So yeah, I mean, what I would say to the audience, if you still feel challenged around observabilities, try and think of some of the other use cases that you can use an observability platform to support the business and support your digital platforms. And I think that will go a long way to justifying why you need full stack observability.
It's a great point. How do you eat an elephant, right? It's one bite at a time. So just start nipping away at it and start your evolutionary journey, observability journey, and start nipping at it and work towards that. So great point.
Yeah, and it's going to be a different journey, I think, for every type of organization. Alicia and I, we cut this data several different ways, cut every question several different ways. And found some interesting things here. So there's different perspectives on what the challenge is for observability. Among IT decision makers, right, the executives, they thought the top reason was that their current performance is adequate, whereas the practitioners thought it was that there was a lack of understanding of the benefits. So a bit of a disconnect between kind of who's this is a rough way to say it, but who's got their hands on the work day to day versus those who are making the decisions about what to buy and implement. And then, cut this another way. We looked at largest companies, so the ones that were actually over 5,000 employees versus the smallest ones. The ones that were the largest companies, their top reason for or top challenge preventing it was that they saw a lack of strategy. And then the smallest companies saw that it was budget and expense were the top two. So different kind of approaches to how they're viewing what the hurdles are, but it's probably going to require a nuanced approach to reach different people and get them to see the benefits. So yeah,
and for sure a reason for people to take a look at it, at the report itself, and download the actual data so they can actually take a look at it themselves. So great value point there. So what's the future of observability? We talked about it in terms of evolution versus revolution. Where do we stand there, and what are the practical outcomes to expect from this journey of observability, right? Peter, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, so we've talked about the evolution. I think the revolution is how do we get ahead of all problems? And so, there's still a bit of a walled garden between developers, I would say, and operations, particularly when it comes to using observability to understand environments, runtime environments. So one of the focal points for New Relic is how do we break down that walled garden so that developers actually get the telemetry and insights they need from runtime environments, from the observability platforms, so they can understand, based on the code changes they're making and the merges and the pushes that they're performing, how are those things performing in real time in production and non-production environments, right? And that's really going to shift some of the sort of responsibility and accountability of the reliability, uptime, and performance of those environments onto the developers, right? Because they're going to have visibility of all that information right within their IDE. They're not going to need to go log into another platform or another UI, and they'll be able to use those insights to not only triage problems and improve their code, but to actually plan their next sprints, right? What should they be prioritizing? What should they be working on in the next sprint? So we call this idea full lifecycle observability, and we think it's going to play a significant part in the future of observability.
Okay. Interestingly enough, you talked about how different teams are adopting. I think there's a question that has come up, and I'll show here the next slide. This is the next step. If you want to read the report, you can go to newrelic.com/Ollie, which is shorthand for observability, and that is where you'll be able to access the full report and eventually download the data if you would like to do so. But kind of addressing some of the questions that are starting to come in. Peter, you mentioned kind of the adoption from different groups, and actually this is a New Relic customer saying that they have two use cases where teams prefer multi-point solutions versus the single consolidated platform, where for application crash reporting, their devs prefer to stick with things like a Crashlytics instead of New Relic mobile crash reporting, although they actually use New Relic mobile for monitoring everything else. And then the product team prefers to see customer analytics in Amplitude instead of New Relic platform. How do you account for this distinction? Are people just used to using the tools that they're used to and comfortable with, and they don't want to take a look at new tools, or is it what is it driving? Is it a cultural transformation? Is it a cultural drive that needs to be implemented along that journey for internal resources to all get on board for this single consolidation of observability? This is why we have a single platform or fewer platforms to monitor different aspects together, so that it becomes the single source of truth instead of plucking and trying to translate information points from different sources. How do you see that kind of disparity happening?
I think there could be a multitude of reasons, right? Sometimes it's what the user is actually familiar with, right? Crashlytics, yes, I mean it's a very, very popular solution, and similarly, Amplitude as well is popular to sort of understand your kind of users' behaviors and being able to slice and dice that data to answer a lot of different questions. And so if you think about those tools, they're really best of breed tools, right? But there's pluses and minuses to a best of breed strategy, and the pluses is you're probably going to get more features and capabilities by standardizing on those individual point solutions, but the downside is you're going to lose context, right? You're going to have to go from this tool to this tool to this tool, and ultimately it's up to the human to become that sort of correlation engine that can understand all these different data points and how they're related. And typically that's different people in different teams, and sometimes they just don't even come together, right, to share that information. So I guess the premise of observability is to create a shared understanding using a common set of tools. And there's going to be cases where we won't be able to have an equivalent capability because our lens is much broader. But I think for the most part, customers can work around some of the limitations, using things like custom dashboarding and custom telemetry in the actual observability platform.
Very cool. Thank you. Alicia, any closing thoughts in terms of the survey, the collection, anything that we missed that you think is interesting? I think we're getting ready for next year as well. So what's up with that?
Yeah, definitely. I guess I just want to say these are some, a few of the highlights in the report, but there are tons more. So do make sure that you go read the whole report. And yeah, we are starting to, already start to plan for next year. So there's particular questions that you'd like to see answered. I think the link, is that the link there, Darren?
Darren, I was gonna say, this is a long link. What is that?
Yeah, it's long.
ETR. So what is that all
Sure.
about?
Sure. If you go to etr.ai, that's our website, and you can find a button in there on how to join the community. The community is basically our pool of survey respondents. So when we get ready to do this survey again, you'll get a notice that it's ready to be taken. And we'll be able to cross that you did it before too. So if you've done it before, we'll reach you again. If you're interested in doing it for the first time, we'd love to get your input. If you have any sort of purview over observability and monitoring tools. And then in our community, we also do several surveys a year on technology spending and other topics. So we compensate for those and so on. So feel free to join. It's free.
Yeah, it's some great pieces of information that we collected. Any closing thoughts, Darren, on the report, on what the findings, anything that we didn't kind of cover, or what stood out to you in collecting and getting this information consolidated? And Peter, start thinking, because that's the same question to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's you can find several places in the study where there's slight differences between what practitioners were thinking versus the IT decision makers, right? And I think that it speaks to organizational disconnect. It speaks to a lot of interesting things that are happening in organizations about this topic. And it'd be fun to see this over the years to see how things are shifting, right? How prevalent is full stack? How are budgets changing? That kind of thing. People, more the majority say they're increasing their budget in IT towards observability in the next year. So we'll see if that holds true. So lots of interesting predictions, but I was just kind of impressed with the findings and the depth and the cool cross, the ways you can slice this data geographically and so on. So it was sort of a feast for a data nerd like me.
And even by industry too. I think there's certain
sure.
findings that you can do as well from the report there as well. So Peter, what are your closing thoughts about observability, about the observability report? And I have some closing thoughts as well. So I'll wait for yours and then I'll close that out.
Sure. Look, for me, I think really what's important is a lot of the findings in this have never been established in the observability industry, right? If you look at sort of adjacent industries like DevOps, there's some significant research in the state of DevOps where they've identified the capabilities that actually drive maturity in customers' DevOps practices. And really, that's what we're trying to get to here with this report. We're trying to tease out the things that actually make a real difference. And I think if you're currently sitting on the fence when it comes to observability, use the findings and the insights in this report to help you understand the benefits, and then justify exploring and reviewing your current capabilities around monitoring and shifting more towards observability, because I don't think these findings have existed in the past, and now they do, and they're available to you.
Yeah, thank you. And as you see, we are going to be continuing this report, so we'll be able to also compare year over year as more respondents come in, as new technologies are included, and as new comments and suggestions come from the field in terms of that community engagement that Darren spoke about. So in closing, I'd like to thank you very much, Alicia, Darren, and Peter, for your insights, for your comments, and letting everybody know that this is hopefully only the first of a series of webinars that we're going to be diving a little deeper into each aspect of the report. But in the meantime, if you want to take a look at the report, this is the link, newrelic.com/Ollie with 11 between O and Y, because there are 11 letters between O and Y in observability. really creative, I know. Thank you, product marketer, for that, I guess. So thank you again, everyone, for attending. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. And hopefully this was very enlightening and useful. Reach out to your account team if you're in New Relic, if you want more information, if you'd like an interesting conversation with Peter. I think he would gladly do that. Alicia for sure is always available, as am I. So thank you, everyone. And hopefully this was of great value. Have a good night, afternoon, or good morning to you, Peter.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.